What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Born to Heal. And oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about this week. Not only did both of us watch the Mr. McMahon documentary on Netflix, we're going to have our thoughts on that for sure. But there's a lot going on as we get ready for Bad Blood and Heavy T, or Edward Rouse, as it would say on your name.
Oh, yeah, I should probably fix that. Continue.
How you feeling right now? We got Bad Blood. You just watched the Vince documentary. We got some crazy stuff going on SmackDown. Raw was wonderful on Monday night. How are you?
Yeah. The first thing I'm gonna be honest, I admit I am disappointed. But that's more in myself because Raw was in Ontario, California this week.
It was.
I could not make it. I was already scheduled to do something else.
And SmackDown was in Sacramento, which was in my neck of the woods, and I could not make that either. So
yeah, so unfortunate, but did find out some good news. Apparently, the first Raw on Netflix is going to take place here at the brand new Intuit Dome in beautiful Inglewood, California. So
that's going to be cheap, right? Those tickets should be cheap.
They're not going to be cheap. That's going to, like, honestly, you're probably looking at like pay-per-view prices for that because it's going to be the first one. They want to go big. I can guarantee you there's going to be some kind of title match that's also right before Royal Rumble season. Like, it's going to be a wild episode. And you might see some swearing. Thank the Lord. No real commercial breaks. Raw will be back to 2 hours too. Like, it's going to be kind of wild, man.
That's the one thing about this last Monday that they really, you can tell that they just try to drag that for 3 hours as long as they can. They could have done that Raw this last Monday in 2 hours. Easily. Yeah. They had to use an hour's worth of just.
It's so funny because we get the news that Raw is going to Netflix and it's going back to 2 hours. Great. Perfect. And then about a week later, SmackDown's going to USA and that's getting extended from 2 to 3 hours. Like, oh my God, why?
That's not what they need to do because SmackDown has not been good lately.
I mean, maybe it would be good for SmackDown. So you put like some more capable stars on there to kind of help extend it for that last hour.
Yeah,
so we'll see.
They're gonna have to bring some stars over or just redraft or something. We'll see.
Like the draft means anything. Redraft. Like, okay.
Well,
it don't mean anything.
It determines who's on which show.
They never stay on that show.
Clearly, Raw's winning the draft right now.
Draft. Yeah.
Hey, Heavy T, you ready? Are you ready
to get drafted?
No,
I don't want to be drafted in Raw.
Oh, let's go, Heavy T. Come on, yeet with me. Come on, Heavy T.
Doing it.
Come on, Heavy T.
Not doing that. Nope.
Just one.
Right,
there
that's
it
it.
is.
There was the one. There was the one. All right. That's all I got. Oh God. God. I hate that. I guess we should just dive right into it.
Yeah, he did it. 14 years in the industry. Obviously, he's part of one of the best tag teams champions of all time with his brother Jimmy, his twin brother. And
one of the best stables of all time in the bloodline.
Everybody thought that Braun would just win and he was going to carry this championship for a while, the Intercontinental, and just surprised everybody and had one of the biggest pops after he won I've ever seen. And a huge shout out to Joe Tessitore, man. He is crushing it.
Oh, he's so good.
Crushing it. Yeah. Just elevating the whole thing on Mondays. What are your thoughts there? I know you're not a big Uso fan.
Definitely caught me by surprise. I thought Braun would have a longer reign.
Me too.
But here's the other thing too. Braun is so good, he doesn't even need that title, like the Intercontinental title. And I know they've done a great job of bringing the Intercontinental title back up from where it used to be. You had Gunther's historic reign, then you had Sammy have a nice good reign after that. Now Braun's was definitely short. But I'd say it was fairly decent for how short it was. And like I said, he doesn't need it. He's so big of a monster, he doesn't need it.
Yeah. And it was surprising. And the way that Jey did it was fun. Giving him the spear, his own spear through the barrier.
Yeah, just
great.
A lot of things in this match happened that I did not see. Like, I was like, you see Jey get the pinfall that's a near fall, and Braun throws his shoulder. Great job by Braun on this part, throwing his shoulder up at literally like 2.9 seconds, as fast as he can to stop the 3 count. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. They gave Jey nice little rub right there, like, oh, he almost had him, and then Jey
like
just
every time.
won the and then Jey just went and won the damn thing, and I was like, oh, this happened. Okay,
not on a pay-per-view,
like,
on Raw.
Yeah, and like a very good surprising, like, oh, this happened, not a God damn it, Jinder Mahal won the WWE championship. I hate it. Like, yeah, it's not that. This is like, oh, this is really good. Like, it's gonna be interesting to see what they do with it now, because Bad Blood's right around the corner. And then after that is Survivor Series. And we're all pretty sure that Survivor Series, they're gonna do old bloodline versus new bloodline. So is one of those dudes just going to be the IC champion? Like, I mean, yeah, it's good for him.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Do you think? And if you look at the tweets, by the way, which are great, but just right after the first thing I did was go to Twitter, X, and read some of these. Rhea Ripley was out there doing yeeting. Said
that was funny.
Ready for Waffle House.
Yeah. This woman got over Dom real quick.
Yeah,
That's so funny. But yeah, the Waffle House tweet. Rikishi's happy. We're living in good times, man. We're living in great times.
We are. It's crazy. But Triple H posted. It's like did like a well-deserved post, and later posted again that kind of hinted that he was going to have this title for a minute.
I mean, that's fine. I'm fine with it.
So I think he's going to carry this for a while.
Okay.
Because they're going to make him main event. He's going to do it. And eventually he'll lose it when he goes back to to Roman Reigns and all that.
Would not be surprised, because if and I'm already thinking like long-term booking. Right?
Yeah.
So he's going to end up doing something with the bloodline for WrestleMania. Yeah. Would not be surprised if Jey holds on to it, but loses it somewhere between the Rumble and Mania. Like,
yeah, that makes a ton of
Solo or one of the boys does something to cost him like his IC title, and he focuses up and gets his eyes on Mania. So,
and how funny is it? How funny is it that our last episode we talked about what the hell are they doing with Jey Uso, and all of a sudden we're like, oh
yeah,
here we go. Okay, now they have a plan. All right, because it seems like they haven't had a plan for so long, right? It's the same thing over and over again.
Is he listening? Is he listening?
I don't know. Maybe they're bored to heel listeners. I don't know. But that was literally the main subject of last show we did. And here we are.
Like, what's going on with Jey? And apparently Jey's winning. So yeah. Shout out Papa H.
I was excited. I've liked Jey for a while since I came back on board. And I'm every day I'm more and more of a Damian Priest fan, dude. He is winning me over like you wouldn't believe right now.
Dude, by the time Mania comes around, both these dudes gonna make you cry. Like, you kind of got emotionally invested in here.
I know. But that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's why you have the storylines and the turns and everything. So, I'm doing okay right now. I'm doing okay.
We're crying, so just good that you're okay. Just take care of yourself, man.
I will. It was exciting. It was fun to watch. Speaking of fun to watch, or not so fun to watch, or it could be fun to watch, I don't know. The Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix dropped, Mr. McMahon, and I know we were watching it kind of not together, but at the same time. But obviously,
yeah, I feel like a majority of people who really wanted to watch it watched it in full yesterday.
Yeah, I watched it in full, and it was something. I learned a lot of history I didn't really know about. It turns out that now people are going to hate this because they're like, you're not a real wrestling fan, but I am now. But when I was younger, I wasn't watching WWE. I was watching WCW.
CW, yeah. I mean, hey, that's fine. A lot of those.
Yeah.
There is no WWE history without WCW.
I did watch WWE after, like, Stone Cold a little bit and all that. But what I remember the most as a kid was WCW. NWO, Sting, when he was badass Sting coming from the rafters looking like the Crow. Razor Ramon and the Outsiders and all that. Like, that's what I remember. And so there it is. But that documentary really brought to light everything quickly in 6 episodes of the full history of Vince McMahon's run with the WWE. And I know you were taking notes. I have a few
Yeah.
notes as well. My first note is this. I understand it's all about business. He's a businessman. But that guy in his interviews has no sense of what is really going on around him at all.
I agree with that, and I'm trying to find the right words to say this, but he is the most, or I guess I should say, he is the most least empathetic person I think I've ever seen
Yeah.
in my life. This
And
dude does not know how to read a room. What's
no,
with anything whatsoever.
but he was really good at reading arenas when he was Mr. McMahon, who, by the way, that was the best part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give it away if you haven't seen it, but the editing of that part of the interview was pretty funny.
I think if you're talking about which part I think you're talking about,
When they
where
ask
he's
him what's the difference between Mr. McMahon and Vince McMahon.
oh, no, okay, so that is part of it.
Yeah.
That was interesting because he comes out and like I am, look, I'm gonna be honest. Watch it on your own time if you're interested.
Yeah.
It's really good. I am gonna spoil it a little bit because I kind of have to go in depth with some of these notes, but
Okay.
still watch it in your own time.
Yeah, pause right now. Go watch
Yeah,
it. Come
if
back
you-
and finish the show.
There you go. Okay, this is your official spoiler alert. I will actually give you an extra 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. If you haven't paused now, it's your own fault. Okay. So, yeah, when he says, like, when they ask him, like, is there a difference basically between Vince McMahon and the Mr. McMahon character? And he says something along the lines of, like, yeah, I don't, they're two different people.
Yeah.
And everybody else, they ask him, like, oh, they're the same person.
And then it goes through a montage of everyone saying it's pretty much the same person. And
Yeah.
not just any, but like we're talking Stone Cold Steve Austin, Bret Hart, which is obvious. Like
Bruce
Shawn
Pritchard,
Michaels,
yeah,
Shawn Michaels.
yeah.
All of them say, yeah, that it's the same guy.
The extension, yeah. Triple H does the same thing too.
Yeah.
So there were so I'm gonna break this down a little episode by episode.
Yeah, let's go back to go back to episode 1 here.
Episode 1, I think you can, that one's a lot of like, the origin story, him coming up. I had known about the stuff between him and his dad, how his dad came into his life like when he was like 12 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I had heard about the abuse stuff from his stepdad. I knew about that because there's a very famous interview that Vince did where he said he wanted to actually like murder his stepdad, which that's the man right there. Like that is that tells you right there, like, yeah, him and Mr. McMahon are the same person. Yeah, so I've seen that. I didn't know about supposedly I think he said like the sexual abuse from like his mom. Like I didn't know any about that. So that was like, oh, okay. But like the first episode, like it's a lot of the origin story stuff. I knew about all that. The second episode is where you kind of first get the sense that Vince doesn't know how to read the room.
It was almost the second episode was almost like a Hulk Hogan documentary too.
Well, yeah, there's that too, and God, do not. That's the other thing too. To everything Hogan says, take that with a grain of salt. Like, do not trust that guy.
All right, brother.
Yeah, but this is where we starting to get some interesting stuff. I think the first real scandal that everybody really noticed was the fact that he had Sergeant Slaughter turn heel in the middle of the Iraq War. Just not a good look. So one thing that they don't mention in the documentary, at least I don't remember them mentioning it, but it is true, is that WrestleMania, I think that was 7 or 8, was supposed to take place at the LA Coliseum. They're thinking like, oh, it's 100,000 seats. We could sell this, pretty easily, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they don't, because they turn Slaughter heel. It's not what anybody wanted. They don't do great ticket sales, and they end up coming up with this story like, oh, because of the storyline, we were receiving bomb threats, so we had to move it to the smaller like LA Sports Arena. So like he doesn't know how to read the room. Also, he buys into like his own stats a little too much, because they also very much mentioned the WrestleMania 3, like, oh, there was 98,000 people there. And then you have Dave Meltzer, who's one of the top wrestling reporters in the country. He's like, yeah, I was closer to 78,000, which is still a lot. Like,
Yeah.
but it's about 20,000 less. And then in episode 2, you start to also get into the other scandal with how women are being treated. Not great. I did not know one thing I did not know about. I did not know apparently about the ring boy scandal. Didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because Vince is saying like, oh, Pat Patterson, who was very instrumental in stuff with like the New Generation and the Attitude Era. They're like, he's like Pat Patterson, like, oh, all around good guy. And then Tony Atlas comes out and is like, oh yeah, this guy was grabbing my dick in the locker room, and even the interviewers were like, the interviewer, he was like, what? He's like, yeah, dude, he's just grabbing my pecker. He's like, did you complain? He's like, who am I going to complain to? He's the number 2 guy in the company. If he's the booker. If I complain to Vince, I'm going to get fired. So it's just, I mean, you can already tell there's like dysfunction.
Weird. Yeah, dysfunction and weirdness going on.
And then you have, let me get her name right. I took a lot of notes on my phone, as you can see. That is a lot. But then you have the stuff with how women are treated. Like Jimmy Snuka killed his girlfriend. Apparently, there was that. The Rita Marie, who was the female ref, claims that Vince sexually assaulted her.
Yeah.
And then so you're having all these things happen, and then the end of episode 2 starts with they're in the middle of the steroid trial. WCW is starting to rise and take over, and Hogan is about to go into the witness stand against Vince.
Oh yeah,
in the steroid trial. So that's how episode 2 ends. So you get to episode 3. Hogan does not do. I mean, the FBI was dumb in this case anyway, as most 90s law agencies were.
The Hulkster said he was telling the truth. He just told the truth, which could be completely truthful.
Well, no, but that's the other thing too. Is that so? Hogan says, "Oh, he never sold anybody steroids. He never told anybody to take steroids." And even Bret Hart backed that up. Even Bret Hart
pretty much just turned a blind eye on it.
Yeah, he basically, he didn't say use steroids. He may have like alluded to it, but he didn't like full out say it. And in that case, the FBI is nothing. And the fact that Bret Hart, who hates Vince, or at least hated him for a long time, backed him up on that. It's like, okay, it's probably true. So you get into that stuff, and then I think episode 3 is where you also have the 2 reporters in the 90s who I can't remember. One of them's running around the back of the locker room asking everybody like, hey, is this sport fake? And he has Vince basically has one of the wrestlers really smack the shit out of him. And then he goes, that reporter goes back onto his news channel. He's like, oh, I have permanent hearing loss now. And then you have the other one where Hogan goes on that late night show with Mr. T to help promote. I think it's like WrestleMania 1. And the guy's like, oh, it's fake. He's like, okay, we'll see if this is fake. Puts him in a headlock. Basically, he goes unconscious. Hogan lets him go. Dude smacks his head on like a cement floor and is very obviously like he turns around and there's like streaks of blood on the back of his head.
Yeah, wasn't that Richard or who was it? It was somebody big.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole Phil Mushnick thing too, where he's just diving in. So it's getting to that point where with all these scandals are one-on-one, and then you have WCW closing in on top of them, that Vince is starting to feel like a caged animal. And that's where he mentions was like the law of the jungle line, basically saying like, hey, look, you gotta make it to survive in this thing. So episode 2 ends with kind of WCW kind of starting to take over. Then you go to episode 3 and it dives in how Vince screws over his wrestlers sometimes. You had the Wendy Richter thing where Fabulous Moolah, basically steals the title from under her. It ends with the
Montreal Screwjob.
With the Montreal Screwjob, which was also interesting. So I did not know. Oh, and also this time, Hogan screws over Vince by signing with WCW.
And everyone's jumping ship,
Yeah, turning heel, and forming the NWO with Hall and Nash. So you have all this going on. So you get to the Montreal Screwjob part. I did not know that Triple H was kind of responsible for giving Vince the idea. He says something along the lines
Mhm.
of like, well, if Brett's not going to drop the title before he loses to WCW, fuck him, do it for him. And I was like, okay, didn't know that. Didn't know that afterwards. I mean, the behind the scenes footage is great.
Yo,
So
it's crazy.
afterwards, Brett is asking Sean, like, did you know? And Sean's like, I swear to God, I had no idea. So Brett basically ends up seeing Vince face to face. They have a little tussle in the locker room, knocks Vince out cold, and basically just leaves. And this is all after he spits in his face
Yeah,
in the middle of the ring
everyone's seen
at the
that clip
pay-per-view.
many times, yeah.
And and then it leads to
Great aim, by the way, from that distance. Oof, great aim.
Oh, yeah, dude, it's right in his eyeball. Dude, it's
Yeah,
funny because,
yeah.
like, you zoom in and you can see, like, fresh spit, like, in his hair and everything. It's like,
Yeah,
damn,
it's
okay.
a great
And, like,
great aim.
it's so funny too because Vince says, this whole time, with everything going on, he spit in my hand. I'm like, how'd he do that? Which I was like, all right, whatever, Vince.
Yeah.
But they ask him if he has any regrets about it, and he says, no, I don't regret anything.
Yep.
And I think to an extent, he pretty much says he'd do it all over again.
Yeah.
So Vince is a wild dude. But episode 3 ends with the Mr. McMahon character basically being born. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
And then, you get to 4, and it's basically the birth of the Attitude Era.
Mhm.
It goes into that whole
That's
thing.
when they were really, like, Sable and all that with the women. Had them doing
Yeah.
lingerie fights and the mud
Yes.
wrestling and
So you get that. It does get serious. And so, okay. The funniest thing I think of this entire documentary, and this clip has gone super viral on Twitter. So if you haven't seen it, look it up. Where Vince says that the Attitude Era was a family-friendly product. And I'm trying to remember what the first thing he says. He said, oh, no one was getting killed or anything. And then they show like Steve Austin getting run over by a car. And I think it's like the big boss man literally just hanging there from a noose. It's like
Yeah.
nobody was getting killed.
The limo
And
blowing up. The limo blowing up.
yeah. And then he says, like, no one was getting raped. And then they cut to Vince saying, come on out, you rapist. And then they say, there were no knives or guns, anything. And then it cuts to the very famous promo with Brian Pillman pulling out a gun on Steve Austin. So he's like, it was very family. I love that Netflix just fact checked it immediately.
Vince had no idea what was going on around him.
No, dude, he's so tone deaf, like just cannot read the room. So it dives into a little bit of the Vince McMahon character. You have the rise of Stone Cold. You have The Rock showing up. Like the Attitude Era is in full bloom. Kind of shows how this is the point where we took over WCW and WCW decided to fall. Much of that was WCW's own fault.
Yes.
But yeah, Raw continued to rise, rise, and rise. And one thing I didn't mention before is like basically when everything switched. Now, there's one part of the documentary in this episode where Eric Bischoff, who's like the lead producer / booker for WCW, he says, I used to read out the results live on air because Nitro was live and Raw was taped, pre-recorded.
Yep.
So he's like, I used to read out, the results or whatever. So in 1999, I believe it's the beginning of 99, is when Mankind is facing The Rock for the WWE title on Monday Night Raw.
Mhm.
And Bischoff, and they don't explain this in the documentary, but this is where everything supposedly switched. Bischoff read the result like, oh, Mankind beat The Rock for the WWE title, and inadvertently had people turning off Nitro and switching over to Raw because they wanted to see that, because everybody loved Mick Foley, everybody loves Mankind.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, we want to see this. So they changed the channel and they just never come back because they're like, oh, well, let's keep watching because this is actually pretty good. So, you have that whole WCW stuff. And then it gets a little, the end of episode 4 gets a little dark because it pretty much ends with the death of Owen Hart. And this is
the most controversial part of the whole thing, I think.
I don't know. You can argue there's a lot of controversial parts of the whole thing, but this is definitely one of them. So Owen Hart, they basically explain how the harness that he was wearing failed and he fell from the rafters because he was supposed to be lowered to the ring. he fell from the rafters and he hit the mat and he pretty much died.
Yeah,
And
wait, let's talk about what happened after Bret Hart left.
okay, yeah.
And then he
So
pretty much demoralized Owen because Owen stayed.
yeah, Owen stayed. Vince had him doing
And
some.
the character he was in was ugh.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It was the blue something.
Yeah, it was that
But it was
costume was terrible. It was a joke.
yeah,
Like,
it was a comedic thing. You
so they
know.
were gonna have him fly in,
Yeah, they were
as
gonna have
Vince
him.
put it, fly
Yeah,
literally.
and Brett thinks is that Brett's thing is like this is all just to get back at me for leaving, and I think that's half true. I don't think it was all just against Brett for leaving, but I mean, Owen could have just said no. Like he was that good in the company where he's like, I'll say no and I'll just leave.
Yeah.
But Owen agreed to do all this stuff. So
Mhm.
it's like, okay. So he's coming down from the rafters. The harness that he's in fails and he falls basically to his death in the middle of the ring.
During a
Now,
blackout.
during a like a blackout where they're like showing
They were
like a
showing
promo or something like that.
Yeah.
So Vince's big thing is that
Mm.
well, nobody saw him die because it was dark. Nobody really saw it happen. So his thing is like if if the lights were on, everybody saw it. He's like, absolutely, I'm stopping the show. But he says because the lights were off, nobody really saw it. Let's get him out of here. And they basically wheel him out. And his blood is still in the like
In the
very
ring.
visible on the
Yeah.
edge of the ring.
Yes.
So all these wrestlers, who, by the way, are all friends with each other for the most part,
Mhm.
backstage.
Undertaker was there.
Yeah.
You had
Undertaker was there. Jeff Jarrett was one of Owen Hart's best friends at this time. They basically wheel Owen Hart, according to Bret Hart, they basically wheeled him past all the wrestlers because that's the only way out. And Jarrett has to open up with the next promo.
Oof.
And he says, hey, we're praying for you, whatever. And then he's like, I can't even remember who he was facing, but he's like, oh, you've been after this chick's tits like the whole time. Like, dude, you don't read the room. Like Vince is basically telling you, go out, do your job. The show must go on. You have to read the room. There is no reason why this pay-per-view should have went on. And on top of that, Vince doubles down in this documentary by saying, if it was me that fell and me that have died, I would want them to go on. Like, oh, shut up, dude.
Well, he was asked what if it was his son.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
First. And then
Yeah.
and then he turned it to himself. And more on his son later because that is something else too.
Yeah. So it ends up getting to the point where Owen's wife, very deservedly so, sues WWE, as she
Yeah.
should. WWE ends up suing the hardest manufacturer. Both end up winning their lawsuit. So I think the only one that really lost money was probably the hardest people.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it ends the way the episode ends is that Taker says that they were pushing it as far as they could. And at some point even says, at some point enough is enough.
Mhm.
Okay. So the next episode, it starts to open with, Steph is kind of an on-screen character right now. Shane is kind of an on-screen character. Like his kids are finally getting involved, right?
Mhm.
The fact that Vince okay, so you find out in the episode, obviously you know this now, but Steph and Triple H are about to get married, right?
Yeah.
Vince wanted to put this marriage on pay-per-view, which you insane old man. Like, dude. He wanted to put the marriage on pay-per-view, and Steph shot that down real quick, as she should. But, it kind of gets into Linda, was the CEO of WWE at the time, and it gets into the whole storyline, the very famous WrestleMania 17 storyline of where Vince is basically hooking up with Trish Stratus, and he has Linda McMahon on these sedatives, and basically she's like a zombie, whatever. And it all ends up culminating at, WrestleMania 17. And they're pushing like the boundary as much as they could. But it kind of goes from that to you have the thing with Sable, where
Mhm.
Sable quits, I think, in like 99 or 2000. ends up suing WWE for sexual harassment, ends up coming back to work for him. And it turns into this whole thing like, hey, Vince is kind of a sicko. Like, yeah, he's kind of wild. And Paul Heyman, I think I said, or he said it best. Vince doesn't, I actually wrote it down. Hold on one second. He said, Vince doesn't own the business owns him. And I think that is, for Vince McMahon specifically, I think that is a very excellent way of putting that. But
During
then
this episode, didn't Vince turn down to buy the UFC as well?
Yeah. So we're literally just going to get into that because this is the part where Vince starts exploring other ventures outside of WWE. You have the XFL, the WBF.
That worked out well.
Which is, both of those worked out well. The World Body Life. They're getting sued by the World Wildlife Fund or Federation or whatever that is. That was based in England. So they're getting sued for that. The XFL and the WBF end up being total disasters. On top of that, you have all these things going on. WCW is dead, by the way, at this point, and then you have Shane pitch the idea, hey, the people who own UFC, they're kind of drowning. Let's buy it. And I believe it was on sale for like $2 million.
It wasn't much. Yeah.
Well,
also the 90s, but yeah.
It wasn't much compared to now. They were just sold for what, like a $4 bill or something like that?
Well, it's just ironic that now UFC had purchased WWE.
That's the weird thing, which we will get to in a minute.
Yeah.
But, you have all these things happen. On top of that, Stone Cold is done. The Rock is leaving for Hollywood. You don't really have all these new stars that carried you through the Attitude Era. They're all kind of gone. And then, like, we got to make new stars. Debut of John Cena. It happens. Yeah. So it kind of goes into all this stuff. And this is also where we kind of get a deep dive into the relationship specifically between Vince and Shane.
And Vince and Steph, too.
Yeah, Vince and Steph, too. But I think it focused more on Vince and Shane because Shane is the one who left. He leaves the company, I think, in like 2009. Because I think it was for a couple things, but I don't think he felt like his dad was respecting him, number one.
Well, he wasn't.
Number two, no, he damn wasn't.
Yeah.
And number two, Shane wants to do these things and he's going to eventually want control of the company. And his dad was like, no.
Yeah.
And then Paul Heyman basically overhears, what Vince and Shane are talking about. And he shares this story that basically Vince took a knife and gave it to Shane, and he said, if you want this so bad, stick the dagger right here. Basically saying, you're not man enough to do it. If you want it so bad, then you're going to have to kill me for it. And he knows Shane won't do it. Yeah. So Shane ends up leaving. He ends up leaving because he didn't think Shane had the right vision for the company going forward. And in hindsight, he did not. Yeah. Because Shane ended up getting fired again in 2022 because he was so bad.
Yeah.
So in hindsight, he didn't. And that's kind of how episode 5 ends. So now you get to the last episode, 6. Yeah. And you start to get into, hey, all these wrestlers that are working for Vince, they're dying really, really young. Like, what's happening here?
Chris Benoit.
It ends with the Chris Benoit one, but there was Eddie Guerrero, there was Test, there was Ashley Mazzaro. Like, a bunch of these wrestlers are dying super young. And by the way, those 3 people did not even make it to their 40s. I think Test was like 33 when he died. All you had to do was look at him and see, like, yeah, that dude's on steroids. So, you have a steroid scandal in a way, not due to the feds, but because these people are literally dying. And then you have the Chris Benoit stuff, which is not good. And this is where I think it gets really interesting. Now, Vince said it wasn't steroids and that Benoit just went nuts. I think there's some truth to that because, as we know now, it was all the CTE stuff. So Chris Nowinski, who used to wrestle for WWE, is in this episode. Chris Nowinski, after he suffered a concussion, basically quit wrestling, went into like the study of, your brain and everything. And he's been like at the forefront of pushing, with all these different sports leagues. This is what CTE is. This is what happens when you get a concussion, blah, blah, blah. So he ends up talking to Chris Benoit's dad. And he says, hey, if you don't mind, I want to check out his brain. I want to. And he says it's the worst brain he's ever seen as far as wrestlers go. But the two things I thought was interesting was one I just said where Vince is like, he just went nuts. It's like, okay. The other thing, apparently Stone Cold does not believe in CTE whatsoever, which I was like, okay, that was random. So Stone Cold says, my thing is like, this was the funny thing too. He's like, I got concussed in WWE one time, and it shows him taking the pile driver from Owen Hart. Big detail he left out. Yeah, that gave him concussion. Also broke his neck in that match with that very pile driver. I love how he didn't mention that. Documentary didn't mention that. It's like, yeah, a pretty big other thing happened in that exact moment. Jeez. Yeah. So they don't mention that, but he basically says, if you have concussions, multiple in wrestling, you're doing something wrong. And he just, I guess, didn't believe that CT. He's like, it's not my thing. Don't believe it, which I was like, okay,
and
boy.
Vince, on the other hand, too, like The Undertaker, who found out the day of
was literally, literally going to
lose his title. And he says he doesn't remember the match because he got concussed early on. And what did
Which he
say?
did, yeah.
Yeah, what did
Vince is like, I don't think he was concussed. I think he was just in.
He was traumatized.
Yeah, he was traumatized. He was in trauma over the fact that, the streak was going to be over.
Uh-huh.
Like, you senile old man. Like, stop it.
Again.
So, yeah.
What's going on around him.
So the funny thing is that you get to what feels like the end of the documentary. Like, it's like everybody's wrapping up, everybody's finishing. And then if you hit pause at this moment where you feel like it's the end, you'll notice there's about a half hour, 40 minutes left. So it's like, okay. And then
what are they going to go into now?
Yeah, and then that's when they started with all the breaking news stuff. Now, I should hint this real quick. Before they mention all that stuff, the last question they ask Vince is, will you ever retire? And he says, no, I don't see myself ever retiring. And everybody else they interview pretty much says the same thing. And then they go to Booker T. And they're like, what do you think it would take for Vince to retire? And then Booker T literally says, a nuclear bomb. And then the screen cuts to black. And then you have all the scandal stuff about Vince within the last 2 years. The the discovery of the hush money by WWE's, I guess, like accountants or whatever. So it started off as Vince paying one woman, I think, $3 million in hush money. And then they do more digging. It ends up being, I think, 12 million to like 4 different women.
And they use Brock Lesnar's name. They dropped.
Yeah. That was the other thing too, is that we ended up finding out that the first woman that was paid the hush money was Janelle Grant, the one who has filed this lawsuit that did not technically name Brock Lesnar by name, but everybody put 2 and 2 together. It's like, it's Brock Lesnar.
They said the name straight up in the documentary.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, in the documentary they say his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it dives into basically what is going on with Vince right now, and he's sold all his stock, and he's pretty much out.
Yeah, he's out. He's just getting to see like that interview with him. I think was all the way through was just like, wow, this guy has no sense of anything. He has he is completely about himself and business, and that is it. Like, he has no emotion, no anything. Well, he has one emotion, anger, I guess would be it. And that's what I got from it. Obviously, was a good businessman, right? He made a lot of money, but
he was a
terrible
businessman. Oh no, he's a terrible
human being. Yeah,
I will let you
even
know,
without the scandal. Everything else before that, I'm just like, this guy's a terrible person.
So real quick, I am not going to mention what is in the sexual assault scandal. If you want to look that up, please feel free to do yourself. I am not mentioning that here. That's a lot.
Yeah, just do the duty of
do the due diligence.
The duty. if you will.
Yes, I get what you're saying, and I'm
Okay.
just gonna leave it at that. Do the due diligence,
Yeah.
the duty, as some may say.
Yeah, drop it
But, you
for
know,
a later date. Yeah.
all right. Anyways, so it's kinda wild. Now, my final thoughts on it are that as someone who knows a lot of history, I did learn, like, a couple things, like, 2 or 3, but the documentary didn't really show me anything I didn't know already. I
Mhm.
know it to the casual person who maybe is either just getting into wrestling or doesn't really know anything about wrestling, but you're like, "Hey, this looks good." To the casual person, yeah, it's a very damning, you know, documentary.
It brought back a lot of memories from when I was young and watching
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like it really brought that back. Like, oh, I forgot about that. Oh, I forgot about that. So that was cool. Uh,
Yeah, I think Netflix, considering everything they know about the lawsuits now, I think they could have dove into that a little bit more. I think 40 minutes wasn't long enough.
yeah.
Um, but it's I thought it was okay. It wasn't. Now this is me, like I said, knowing everything I've known already. I didn't think it was that bad
Wasn't that
until the end. Then it's bad.
and yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
I think the way that he conducted himself and the way they edited around his interview was what made him look just completely like a monster.
Yeah, the
Um,
fact that he canceled all the interviews right after. It's like, "Hey,
oh
man,
yeah,
you have a shot
he
to."
retired, canceled all the interviews, got everything to stock. He's in Aruba somewhere. Like
Yeah, he's just
you can't
I
look
I
more guilty than that. Let's put it
I
that
will
way.
I will end it with the very last note I have, and that very last note is Vince ain't ever seeing the light of heaven, which I think is 100% true. That
I
dude is going straight to hell.
Fair
So,
enough. So do you okay, right now wrestling is I think at a high point. Probably the highest it's ever
yeah,
been. It was we just found out today actually that next year's SummerSlam will be in New Jersey at the Meadowlands for 2 nights.
yeah.
So that's good. I feel like we needed 2 nights this last year. There was still kind of unresolved stuff they could have added to it. So I'm glad it's going to 2 nights. We kind of knew that was going to happen.
I think that's
Um,
gonna happen in 2020. Oh, no, it is 2025. Minnesota's getting it in 2026.
and that's going to be 2
Uh,
nights as well.
yeah, that's gonna be 2 nights as well. That's
So
right.
pretty
Okay.
much WrestleMania and SummerSlam will both be 2 nights just going forward, which is cool.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
As long as they don't wrestle on the turf at Meadowlands, so everyone tears their ACLs, I think they'll be okay. And SummerSlam makes sense too because outdoors not as cold. So
Yeah.
pretty cool.
I think, the funny thing is that if Vince was still with the company and this documentary came out, even post scandal, then I think you would have a serious problem. But now
Yeah.
that he's gone, and
I think everyone's just relieved, right?
I, yeah, because everyone is just relieved, one, but number two, the product as a whole, and they don't really dive into this as much. The product
No.
as a whole since Vince is gone is a lot better. When Vince was here, especially like everything from give or take 2010 to about 2021, everything was horrible. They were like
Yeah.
on an
They didn't
11
even
year.
they didn't even mention it that era at all in
Yeah,
the
because
documentary. They
yeah,
skipped it completely.
yeah,
Yeah.
it basically anything they had good going, Vince would just destroy it. And,
Yeah.
I could name that with a bunch of different wrestlers and the storylines that they had. I
Mhm.
mean, he drove CM Punk out of the company.
Mhm.
Bray Wyatt was one of the best creative characters they had had in years. Absolutely drove him to the middle of the ground.
Mhm.
Turned Kane from this monster from hell into like some corporate yes man.
No.
That happened.
The yes era.
Never turned John Cena heel. That happened.
That
You
still
had
hasn't happened.
yeah, well, yeah, it still hasn't
Yet.
happened.
Yet.
It's
There's still a year left to find
that'd
out.
be interesting if he did. That'd be interesting if he did. But that will never happen under Vince's reign because that's gonna be under Triple H's reign now. And that's just a small example
Well,
of
Vince
like
had a
all
hard
this.
time. The documentary showed that Vince had a hard time turning his babyface's heel because they made so much money as a babyface. That was his thing. That's what Hulk. That's what when he went to WCW and went heel, that he was surprised and he would
But I
never
think the
make him heel.
the funny thing is that you look at how much money the NWO made
A ton.
after they turned Hulk Hogan heel,
Yeah.
and Vince is like, still not doing it.
Yeah,
Like,
still.
I think, don't get me wrong, they made a lot of money, especially with kids, with John Cena being,
Yeah.
the baby face and never losing or whatever.
Yeah.
I think they make a lot, potentially more, if
Well,
he turns heel.
They
Because
made
then
a ton of
yeah.
money with Stone Cold as well. Obviously, the 316 shirts and all that. He was kind of a tweener, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Would you consider him a tweener? But he was just
Look at what
likable
happened
because
with
he was
look at what happened with The Rock. The dude showed up as a baby face. Everybody was
he got
chanting "Die
booed.
Rocky Die." They hated him. Joins the Nation of Domination, and within a couple months, the dude's like the #1 heel in the company. Everybody loved him.
Same thing happened to Roman Reigns when he was first in wrestling.
Yeah.
Everyone booed him all the time. He was a baby face, went heel, and has one of the best heel reigns of all time. No pun intended.
Yeah, there's things you could do to make it work, but Vince is just, I don't know, man. It's like I said, the dude's a weird guy.
Mm-hmm.
He ain't seen the light of heaven. That's all I got.
Yep. It was a good watch, man. It was a good watch for a middle of the week sesh, I guess. But
One way of putting it.
some nostalgia there. Learned a lot. Before we go, because we've been going a little long because we've been talking about the documentary. Let's talk about next week. By the way, will be the Bad Blood episode where we give our predictions. We've had another card added to the another match added to the card of Bad Blood. Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns are tagging up to face Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu. Now, we kind of predicted that we thought it would be Cody Rhodes versus Jacob Fatu in this match. We didn't think that Solo and Roman would be involved. Well, maybe from the outside, but in the match as a tag team. So unlikely partners in Cody and Roman. What are your thoughts here with pairing?
I'm fine with that. I'm curious to see where this match ends. I think they can go a couple different ways, but I think this is where the Bloodline and Cody Rhodes also splits off, and Cody's going to do his own thing now, and the Bloodline, because they're going to do their own thing. Because I think it will get to the point. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be for a title, but I think we do get to the point where it's The Rock versus Roman at Mania. So Cody's going to end up, fighting someone else. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that is officially the 4th match, I believe, on the card.
Yeah, we got Punk, McIntyre, Hell in a Cell, Priest, and Ballard, which is going to be, that's talk about Bad Blood. And
that'll be a good one.
Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley 3.
Which I believe Dom is going to be in a shark cage for that one, right?
Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention.
That's happening.
Adam Pearce came out and said that he's tired of dirty Dom Mystique Mysterio and his mustache. He did mention his mustache too, by the way, which is funny. He will be suspended above the ring in a shark cage.
Honestly, dude, look, if they ever wanted to do this, I'd be fine with it. I'd be fine with a match between Rhea and Dom specifically. And if Dom loses, he has to shave everything.
Oh, yes, please.
I'd be kind of fine with that.
Yeah, I'd be fine
with
that too.
We'll see what happens.
I want cage cam. I want a cage cam, a separate screen, a cage cam.
Now, okay, that actually reminds me. I do believe this match or this card is starting an hour earlier than normal.
Yes.
And I do believe also that is because they are adding, I think, a 6th or a 7th match to it. I can't remember.
Well, there's 4 announced now instead of a week and a half from now. There's 4 announced here.
There's 4 announced now. The Friday or being tomorrow, I guess, because we do record this on Thursday. Yeah. You're going to have Nia Jax versus somebody made official. That's going to happen.
It's going to be a 3-way, I would imagine. I think from what happened. Okay, explain this to me. I know we got to go, but they both said we're going to have a tag team fight. Loser gets kicked off of SmackDown, but Nia Jax and Stratton lost to Bayley and Naomi. So why aren't they kicked off of SmackDown?
Was it a tag or was it a triple threat?
I think it was a weird. Yeah, it was a weird one. It was on SmackDown last Friday.
Yeah, I'm double checking it right now.
I thought it was a 2 versus 2.
It was a 2 versus 2.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I just work here.
I have a feeling. I have a feeling we're gonna see Stratton, Jax, and Bayley 3
No.
person match. No,
I think you end up getting. Ooh, excuse me.
let it out.
I think you end up getting Nia versus Bayley versus Naomi, and whoever wins that match. If Bayley or Naomi win that match, Stratton's cashing in immediately. If Nia wins that match, I'm going to say she still cashes in, but I don't feel as good about that as if Bayley or Naomi won.
I think she turns on Nia eventually, right?
I think so eventually too, yeah.
So
but I'll tell you what, we'll save that for the picks next week. We'll see what
I think that match will be in there as well. That's one for sure. As far as anything else, I don't know. Maybe LA Knight.
you might have a Jey rematch with Braun.
A Braun rematch. Yeah. Monday's going to be interesting to see because they're going to open up with him.
Oh, and they're probably going to add Gunther and Sammy to that too.
Gunthy, your old pal Gunthy. Oh yeah,
Gunther and Sammy mixed up, called him Gunthy.
You think that match is gonna happen?
That'll be on Bad Blood, yeah, because that makes sense because they had the rivalry over the IC title belt before, so there is some Bad Blood there.
But how many times can Gunther keep on saying no? Because it's hilarious
until Pierce makes him actually do it, which will happen.
It's been, dude. Gunther is the best.
Oh,
he's so funny.
And the other match that probably gets added, depending what happens on Raw, Strowman and
the Monsters.
Yeah, Strowman and
we didn't even talk about that.
Bronson Reed.
The Miz. Yeah, Miz was supposed to get a match and he got completely taken off.
I think, dude. Can we admit? I don't know if you saw this real quick, and we are really going over time. But
we're good.
The promo with Bronson, like the promo video, with Bronson Reed and Braun Strowman
walking through the city. Like Godzilla.
One of them, Godzilla and King Kong. Dude, that promo, I was like, this thing rules, dude. Yeah. This thing is so good.
And that's happening on Raw, right?
That is happening on Raw. And this is what I mean when I said earlier that since Vince has been gone, the product is so much better. Because all his cronies and the people who were like the yes men to him are also gone. And one of them was Kevin Dunn. Kevin Dunn was basically like the lead producer for everything, and he sucked.
Any relation to
Pete? What's that?
Any relation to Pete?
No, no relation to Pete. No. But no, he sucked. Everybody hated him. And I will say it once and I will say it again. Kevin Dunn should be in jail for his crimes against wrestling, dude. That dude had so much say in the creative process and how things were filmed. You would have never got stuff like this if Kevin Dunn was still there. Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. Promos have been good. Raw's been good.
We like feasting, man.
We are feasting and doing.
You know, I'll tell you what, to end it on a good note, we feasting at the local Waffle House tonight, baby. Let's go.
Oh, you don't tempt me for a good time. Come on!
I'm not doing it again. One more.
It's just me who's day one. There it is.
One more.
We're eating the heck out of here. Enjoy your weekend of wrestling. We'll be back next week with our picks for And We Got Bad Blood. See ya.